I love Borderlands 3 for a multitude of reasons, but why do I feel like I'm not the majority in this? Is it because I'm just a huge fan of the series in general? Is it because I didn't initially play it at launch, therefore I didn't have to experience the litany of bugs and frame rate issues that early adopters copped from day one? And to be fair, I wanted to be there playing this game from day one, and my partner and I even bought a copy each on launch day so we could play together, but I was swamped with a bunch of other games at the time, trying to get reviews done, and she was incredibly busy with work, so we didn't want to start the game single player and have the other one miss out. Whereas the reason I'm enamored with Borderlands 3 is simply because it is the looter shooter that sets the bar in my opinion, and I find so much joy in its aesthetic, dumb humour, new and old characters, and its gameplay loop. It's probably a bit of all of these, but now I've played this game from start to finish cooperatively, and now that I'm at the end game in which there is still a ton of content for us to complete, a huge relief with a game in this genre, I think Borderlands 3 is one of the most underrated games of 2019. Let's get a couple of things set right off the bat here. I'm a huge fan of the Borderlands series in general. I have been since the first game, and Borderlands 2 ranks highly in my top 10 games of the decade. Check out my video to see why. But if you've seen my 2019 Game of the Year video, it's a notable omission, because I didn't play more than a couple of hours of it until just recently. But now I've put in about 80 hours, finished the campaign, hit level 50 and beyond, and I've got to say this is definitely one of my favourite games that released last year. The gunplay is as fun as ever, but it has been meticulously improved to make the gameplay more fast-paced and intense. The weapons have better feel to them, more impact, and each manufacturer is entirely different from the next. Something that I think makes the shooting in Borderlands 3 really stand out. You know when you're using an elemental and futuristic Malawan gun, or a 6-shooter from Jacobs, Hyperion, Torg, Atlas, TDR, COV, they all have their own traits and characteristics that go far beyond anything from the previous Borderlands titles. The loot grind has always been a prominent feature of Borderlands, and the third entry goes further than its predecessors as you'd expect. Constant loot drops from bosses, enemies, chests, and toilets are all just part and parcel with Borderlands. You won't go 5 minutes without finding weapons, even if many of these you'll mark as trash and just sell them to Marcus. Deep into the game, and in the end game in particular, enemies are harder, drop better loot, and you can of course grind bosses for legendaries that everyone craves in this genre. I wanted Anthem to be good, but the loot grind was repetitive, uneventful, and the selection of weapons was just pathetic, especially once you hit level 30 and the so-called endgame. Simple upgraded versions of weapons you already had at lower levels were not satisfying enough, and dropped far too seldom, and this was just one of the reasons I stopped playing Anthem pretty early on. Even though I didn't hate Anthem as much as many others, I stopped playing one day and I never went back. But Borderlands 3 rewards the player with loot in droves. You even get a gun that shoots other guns, just for kicks. Vending machines sometimes have cool weapons too. Crazy Earl may occasionally have a sweet anointed weapon that perfectly matches your build. Golden keys will sometimes pay out with legendaries as well, but just playing the game will always reward you with loot. The endgame has been fleshed out further as well from its predecessor, giving you the ability to crank up the mayhem for better loot drops thanks to increased difficulty modifiers. Or you can go back to the start and play true Vault Hunter mode for a tougher campaign run, with changes to enemy types, more badasses, and more bonkers experience of the game's story. For me, combat is just so fun in Borderlands 3, and gets to a level of crazy thanks to its colourful elemental effects, tons of enemies, wild weapon types, shield, artifact and class mod effects that shower the screen. It's so much information and colour that it can sometimes be overwhelming, but never boring. You might find a legendary weapon that just works perfectly for your build, and it can change your gameplay strategies. You can pay to respec whenever you want, and mess with your abilities and ways to play the game too, without worry. And the option of 3 action skills to choose from is a breath of fresh air and a great quality of life improvement over the previous games. But this is just one component of Borderlands 3, and don't get me wrong, even though I love its gameplay loop and its rewarding loot grind, there are some things worth criticising about Gearbox's latest outing.
Zero! Come on, man! I thought we were friends! You should have joined the family, Reese!
I've spoken about this on the channel before, but why do so many game developers have so much trouble creating good villains these days? This was another huge issue with Anthem. The Monitor sucked. He was the most cookie-cutter bad guy with no development and no fathomable reason to be such a threat, and was a spit in the face of BioWare's previous villains like Saren, Sovereign, Harbinger, and the Collectors, and these are only from Mass Effect. Handsome Jack was phenomenal. He was a madman, yes, and fit perfectly within the Borderlands lore, but he was also smart, calculating, brutal, hilarious, powerful, and psychopathic, and was a force to be reckoned with. He killed beloved characters. He was always a step ahead of the Vault Hunters and tormented them to their wits' end, but in the end he was memorable and actually kind of likable in a weird masochistic way. But my god, the villains in Borderlands 3, the Calypso twins, are so unlikable, so immature, so frustratingly annoying, that every time they made their appearance, I would pretty much tune out and wait for the end of the cutscene or dialogue. What annoys me the most about the way Gearbox developed their villains and the main crux of the story that explains who they are and why they search for these vaults across the galaxy could have been done so much better. Their origin is really quite interesting when you finally find out near the end of the game. Like Handsome Jack, they kill a beloved character, albeit in a scene that had little impact in comparison to what happened in Borderlands 2, and pushed along a narrative that was wasted, but we'll get onto that soon. They were always a step ahead of you, but they like to tell you they were every step of the way, and it's just grating. But their personalities were just god-awful. I understand they were meant to be annoying streamers that had amassed an army into their cult, but I think the streamer angle was stupid, and it amounted to nothing good. I like the idea that they banded together with the ramshackle bandit clans from all over the galaxy to fight back against the Vault Hunters, and I like the idea of the Children of the Vault's cult of insane bandits that you fight against for the majority of the game, and even the fact that they have Maliwan working for them, but the way this is all executed is uninteresting, and Troy especially is probably the most annoying character in the series, and yes, I'm including Claptrap. The Calypsos aren't helped by the game's at times dumb plot. I like that they steal Lilith's powers at the start, rendering our beloved Firehawk harmless, and I like that they have the power to drain sirens in general because Borderlands has done such a great job in making the sirens so integral to the plot. But in general, and especially in comparison to the excellent story of Borderlands 2, the main plotline is underwhelming and it has some huge misses, losses of important characters for no good reason, and some truly disappointing characters that are given much more importance than they deserve, with little to no character growth along the way. The ancillary storylines that drive the main quest against the Calypsos is much more interesting. The Maliwan Atlas battle for power, the survival of the family-run Jacobs Corporation against the imposing enemy force of the COV, and even the search for the Great Vault and the cool new locations you get to explore along the way. These all do a good job of giving the player interesting places to visit, with wildly different biomes than Pandora alone, with some of these being beautifully designed and really fun to explore, and the bosses you fight along the way are varied as well. But why do I think this is one of the most underrated games from last year, if I have so much negative to say about it?
Can't hold out much longer.
Now, let's get something straight. Metacritic and OpenCritic scores are not the be-all and end-all of how a game should be judged. Some games are overrated by critics and users, some underrated by both, and some are hugely swayed one way or another in both categories, in complete contrast to each other. There can be review bombs on user scores, buggy launches, and just plain hate from critics. But in general, this is the way for potential players to get a grasp of how a certain game plays, pros and cons, and a decent way to determine if they should spend their money on a game. Borderlands 2 sits at around 89 to 91 on Metacritic, depending on the platform, with the original coming in at around 81, which to me is a fair distinction. Borderlands 2 is a freaking masterpiece in looting and shooting, and a legendary game in my opinion. Borderlands 3, however, has a rating between 78 and 82 depending on the platform, and so many reviews from critics listed on the site, as well as YouTube reviews and other opinions at launch, were so quick to state that it is just more Borderlands. And I personally think this is a stupid statement. Borderlands 3, despite its admittedly poor story, has some of the most fun combat I've played in a long time. Has great quality of life features like the Mayhem modes and True Vault Hunter, a plethora of side activities, enemy types, weapon types, loot in droves, a solid endgame, customization that far eclipses its predecessor, and lacks microtransactions of any sort. It's a beautiful game with a timeless art style, incredible detail, a vast array of worlds to explore, interesting playable characters with build diversity options, and many ways to experience the gameplay loop. Yeah, it's more Borderlands. In every single way possible, it's more Borderlands, but what did people expect? It to be a different style of game? I just feel that so many reviewers are harsh on this game despite the many benefits that it has over its brilliant prequel. There are so many reasons why Borderlands 3 improves upon its predecessor, and gameplay is definitely first and foremost in this equation, closely followed by weapon diversity and sheer number of customization options and quality of life improvements. I love Borderlands 3, but I'm not so blind to be ignorant of its downfalls, and this mainly falls at the feet of its game's storyline. But I think it's one of the most underrated games from last year, with so much fun to be had in single player or in co-op with friends online or even side by side on the couch in split screen. The developers are adding more content and making changes and fixes regularly. There is already one DLC expansion out and one more releasing like right now. New endgame experiences and timed events for free and an absolute treasure trove of cool legendary loot to unlock as you plow through thousands of enemies. If you want a purely fun adventure and you want the gameplay, environments and loot turned up to 11, I highly recommend playing Borderlands 3. You won't be disappointed. But that's just my 2 cents worth. How about you let me know in the comments below what you thought of Borderlands 3 and if you agree or disagree with me on this one. Hit me up on Twitter at DirectGaming2 if you want to talk video games. Thanks for watching and until next time, peace.
Look at this idiot! I call this a successful operation.